Everybody standing in the yard of the Cross Anvil had already decided what Tamsen Locke had come to say, and they had arranged themselves to hear her say it. It was the 3rd of October, 1888, a bright cold Wednesday in the north end of the San Luis Valley, and there were 14 men in that yard who had no business being there. 2 of them were hay hands who had found a reason to be sorting hames by the shop door. 4 were teamsters off the Bonanza Ore Road who had pulled up for water an hour ago and had not left. The rest had ridden over from Saguache, the way men ride over to a hanging, with their coats brushed and their faces already fixed into the shape of sympathy, which is the cheapest thing a man can wear and the heaviest thing to stand under. She came in on the seat of her father's flat wagon behind a pair of unmatched sorrels, and she brought the wagon around the water trough and stopped it square in the middle of the open ground, which was the first thing that went wrong for them. A woman who has come to apologize stops her wagon at the edge. She gets down close to the fence where she can put a hand on something. Tamsen Locke stopped in the middle of the yard where there was nothing to hold, wrapped the lines twice around the brake handle, and sat there a moment looking at the low log office with its shingle roof and its plank step, the way a driver looks at a grade before she takes it. She was 25 years old. She was wearing the brown-gray wool work dress she wore every day of her life, with the square patch on the right shoulder where a hame hook had torn it 2 winters back, sewn in a shade that did not match and had never been meant to, and the hem faced with a strip of darker cloth because the dress had been let down twice, and there was no more dress to let down. Over it she had a canvas coat that had been her father's. Her hair was pinned the plainest way a woman can pin hair. Her hands were square and brown to the wrist and pale above it, and the back of the left one carried a white line from a wire she had misjudged when she was 19. In the pocket of the canvas coat, folded into quarters, was a letter her father had written out 3 times at the kitchen table before he got it to a length he could bear. Harlan Locke had not come. He had stood at the gate that morning with his hat in both hands. An old man at 58 in a way he had not been at 55, and he had said, "Tamsen, you read it exactly like it's written. Don't add to it and don't take from it." And she had said, "I'll do what wants doing," and he had heard that as agreement because he needed to. The office door opened, and Silas Rowan came out onto the plank step, and the yard went quiet the way a room goes quiet when the thing everybody came for finally starts. He was 33 and built like a man who had done the work before he owned it, wide through the shoulder and plain in the face, in a dark wool coat that fit him properly, and boots that had been cleaned. He owned 9,000 acres of hay meadow and sage flat along Saguache Creek and the water that went with it. He held the hay contract for the ore road out of Bonanza and the freight barns at Villa Grove, and he bought and sold more harness horses in a year than anybody between Poncha Pass and the Rio Grande. He was not a cruel man. He was something the valley found harder to forgive, which was an exact one. He had been ruined once at 24 by a handshake in a hotel lobby in Pueblo, and had come back from it, and had never since believed a word that was not written down. He looked at the wagon in the middle of his yard, and at the woman on the seat of it, and he said, "Miss Locke, Mr. Rowan, your father's not with you." No, something in the yard moved then, a small shifting of 14 men who had just understood that the entertainment might be worse or better than advertised. Ot Pharaoh, over by the corral with his thumbs in his vest, said, in the easy-carrying voice of a man doing a kindness, "He's not well, Silas. Harlan's not been well since the spring." "She's come on his behalf, and I think we can all, Mr. Pharaoh," Tamsen said. She did not say it loud. She said it the way you say a horse's name when it has drifted a foot out of line. And Ot Pharaoh stopped, and the yard heard her stop him, and that was the second thing that went wrong for them. "He asked me," she said, "not you." She got down off the wagon. She did not go to the fence. She walked out into the middle of that open ground in her patched dress, with the sun coming flat across the valley off the snow on the Sangre de Cristo range, and she stood there with her hands loose at her sides and looked up at Silas Rowan on his step. "I've a letter from my father," she said. "I've read it. It says he is sorry, and it says he has no money, and it says he throws himself on your goodwill. Both of those things are true, and one of them is useless to you. Nobody in the yard said anything at all." "I'd rather not read it out," she said. "If you want it read out, I'll read it out, and I'll not flinch. But I'd rather do the other thing." Rowan came down off the step. He came halfway across the yard and stopped, and left a good 20 feet of dry ground between them, and put his hands in his coat pockets. "What other thing?" he said. "Business," said Tamsen Locke. "The debt was $2,000, and everybody in the valley could have told you the number, because a number like that gets carried from porch to porch the way weather does. It had two halves. The first half was $860, and it was hay and grain. It had stood at $1,460 at its worst, bought on credit through the winter of 1886 and the spring of 1887, when the June frost had taken the Locke meadow and taken it early, so that Harlan Locke came into November with 23 head of horses and about a third of the hay they needed. He had gone to Silas Rowan because Rowan had hay and because Rowan sold it at the same price to everyone, which in a hungry winter is a rarer virtue than generosity. Rowan had written him a line of credit at the ordinary rate and had never once mentioned it in company. That was the clean half. The second half was $1,140, and it was not clean at all. In the March of 1887, with the note already sitting at $860 and his pride sitting somewhere lower than that, Harlan Locke had sold Silas Rowan a pair of black geldings. They were beautiful horses. That was the whole trouble. They were full brothers out of a Percheron crossed mare Harlan had bought in Trinidad years before, coming 6 and coming 7, matched to the hair, black as a stove lid, 1,300 pounds apiece, and moving off the ground like they had been drawn rather than bred. He called them Deacon and Bishop, because he had a churchy sense of humor, and because the two of them stood at the fence in the evening with their heads together, looking exactly like men agreeing about somebody. Harlan Locke had spent the best 2 years of his late life on those horses, and he had sold them broke to double, and they were not. That is the sentence the valley used, and it was near enough to true to stand up in a yard. What was actually true was slower and sadder. Bishop was broke to double, and had been since he was 4. Deacon was broke to almost everything, and finished at nothing. He drove single all day long. He worked in the plow, and he worked in the hay rake, and he stood for the farrier, and he had never in his life offered to do a wrong thing. But he had a place in him, somewhere between his shoulder and his temper, that had never been walked all the way through, and Harlan Locke knew that the way a father knows a thing about his own and does not say it, because saying it out loud makes it real and makes it worth $150 less. So he sold the pair for $600, which was cheap, and Alma Rowan wrote the $600 against the hay and brought what he owed for it down to $860. And he told Silas Rowan the horses were broke to double and would go anywhere a man pointed them. On the 9th of April, 1887, Del Prine took the pair over Poncha Pass with 200 pounds of freight on a Bain wagon and came down the north side into a place where the road bends left with a shale bank on one side and nothing at all on the other. Something happened to Deacon on that grade. Del Prine, who was as good a teamster as the valley had, and who never once tried to lie about it, said afterward that the black on the near side started climbing out of his collar about a mile above the bend, and kept trying to get out from under something for the whole mile, and then quit trying, and simply went. He took his brother with him because that is what a pair does. The load pushed. The wagon came around, and the whole outfit went off the road and down 40 feet, and it was a wonder that a broken arm and a smashed load was all it came to. The wagon was $300. The freight was $530. Del Prine could not work from April to August, and Rowan paid him anyway, and put $300 of it on the note, and the valley thought that was rough, and Rowan did not care what the valley thought. Bishop came out of it with a cut hock and nothing else. Deacon came out of it whole and useless. And $1,140 went on to the bottom of Harlan Locke's account in Alma Rowan's neat upright hand. Under the line reading hay and grain, carried $2,000, against a place worth maybe 2,600 with the water counted, and 11 head of green horses, and a man of 58 who had stopped going to town. Rowan had not sued. That was the part the valley could not read. He had let the note sit for 18 months without a lawyer and without a word, and men decided that meant he was slow, or soft, or waiting for the ground. What it actually meant was that Silas Rowan did not want the Locke place. He wanted the $2,000, and more than the $2,000, he wanted somebody to come and stand in front of him and account for it out loud, because the thing that had been taken from him at Ponchapass was not chiefly money. In September, Alma Rowan had written a letter to Kerber Creek in her upright hand, and it had said, without any heat in it at all, that the note would be placed with an attorney in Alamosa on the 15th of October, unless some arrangement was proposed. And Harlan Locke had sat at his table and written out an apology 3 times, and had sent his daughter with it. "I'll tell you what I have," Tamsen said, in the middle of the yard, with 14 men listening, and not one of them breathing loud. "I have 11 head on Kerber Creek. 2 of them are worth money today, and 9 of them are not. I have my father, who is a better horseman than anybody standing in this yard, and who cannot be relied on to say a true word about a horse he owns, which is a different thing from a liar, and I'll not have it called the same. I have a place with 3 good springs on it, and a hay meadow that will make 40 tons in a fair year. I have no cash whatsoever. If you take the place tomorrow, you will get a hay meadow you don't need, because you have 9,000 acres of hay, and you will not get your $2,000, because it isn't worth it, and you know that better than I do." Rowan said, "That's a fair account of it." "So I'd rather sell you something," she said. "You've nothing to sell." "I have 22 months," she said, "and I can make pears." There was a noise in the yard at that, not quite a laugh. Somebody by the shop said something with the word woman in it. Aunt Pharaoh said, "Silas, if I could," and Tamsen Locke did not even turn her head. She simply raised her left hand about 6 inches, palm down, the way you check a horse that is thinking about coming into you, and Aunt Pharaoh did not finish it. Rowan noticed that. It is worth saying exactly when he noticed her, because it was not later, and it was not at the sale, and it was not in the lamplight. It was there, at 20 feet in a cold yard, when a woman in a patched dress stopped a man mid-sentence with the back of her hand, without looking at him. "Say it," he said. "8 pairs," said Tamsen Locke. 16 head. Sound in the wind, broke to double, and broke honest, delivered to this yard on dates written down. $250 the pair. That is $2,000, and that is the whole note, and I'll not ask you to forgive $1 of it. $250 is under the market, Rowan said. Yes, considerably under. Yes, she said. That's the apology. That's the whole of it, and it's the only part of it you can bank. I'm not going to stand in your yard and tell you my father is sorry, because you can't feed that to anything. Somebody laughed then, one short bark from over by the trough, and it died on its own. Rowan stood a while. Behind him the office door had opened again, and Alma Rowan had come out onto the step, 44 years old, in a plain dark dress, with a ledger held against her hip, the way another woman holds a basket, and she stood there and did not say a word for the next quarter of an hour, and missed nothing. And where, Rowan said, do 16 harness horses come from, Miss Locke? You just told me you have 9 that aren't worth money and no cash. They come from the 9, said Tamsen. And from every green horse in this valley that somebody has quit on, which is a crop nobody has ever failed to grow. I don't want made horses. Made horses cost money. I want the ones that are wrong in one place, because that is 3 weeks of work and everybody else calls it a fault. And you can do that. I can do that. I bought a horse from your family in the spring of 1887, Rowan said, and there was no heat in it, which made it worse. I was told he was broke to double. I have his account in there in my sister's writing. Why would I buy 16 more? The yard had been waiting all morning for the part where she cried, or where she got angry, or where she said something about her father that they could carry home. What she said was, "Bring him out." Nobody moved. "You've still got him," she said. "He's in the far pen behind your shop, and he's been there since April of last year, because you won't sell a horse you'd have to describe. Bring him out and put my collar on him, mine, off my wagon, not yours, and I'll drive him in this yard in front of all of you, and then you can decide whether I can make a pair." Silas Rowan looked at her for what Alma Rowan later said was a long time, and what everybody else in the yard remembered as no time at all. "Dell," he said, "get the black." It took Del Prine 10 minutes to get him, and the yard filled up the whole 10 minutes with the particular kind of talk men make when they are not sure which way to bet. Deacon came around the corner of the shop at the end of a lead rope with his head up and his eyes showing white all the way around. 7 years old now, black as a stove lid still, and about 90 pounds lighter than he had any business being, and every man in that yard leaned back an inch without knowing he had done it. Del Prine, who was not afraid of horses and had the arm to prove it, was walking wide of the shoulder. Tamsen Locke went to her wagon and lifted a collar off the pegs behind the seat. It was an old collar, oiled black, the leather gone soft at the throat from being handled. She carried it out into the middle of the yard, and she did not go to the horse's head. She stood 15 feet off, with the collar hanging from her hand, and let him look at her, and she talked. What she said, according to 2 men who were close enough, was not soothing and had nothing in it about the horse at all. She told him, in a flat conversational voice, that it was the 3rd of October, that the hay was in, that her father was at home and would not come, and that she was going to put a collar on him now, and he was going to be all right. She talked to him the way you talk to somebody you have known a long time and have not seen since something bad happened. Then she walked in on the near side, not at his head, laid her hand flat on his shoulder, ran it down and back the way you check a wall for a stud, and stopped. Alma Rowan said afterward that she stopped for about 3 seconds. Nobody else saw it at all. She opened the collar at the throat, turned it upside down, put it on him over the head, and turned it right way up on his neck, and set it back into his shoulder with the heel of her hand. He stood. Del Prine's harness came onto him over that. Hames, back pad, breeching, lines, and he stood for all of it, and when she picked up the lines and stepped back and clucked at him. Deacon walked off across the yard of the Cross Anvil like a horse who had been waiting 18 months for somebody to ask him properly. She drove him around the water trough. She drove him up the yard and turned him left and turned him right and backed him 4 steps, and then she stopped him square 20 feet in front of Silas Rowan and stood there holding the lines with the whole valley watching. "He'll not go in a wagon," somebody said. "Not on a grade he won't." "He'll go in a wagon," said Tamsen. "He went off with Dell," Ott Farrow said. "Went off with a good man. That's a horse with a hole in him." Tamsen Locke turned around then and looked at Ott Farrow properly for the first time that morning. "Every horse has a hole in him," she said. "Every man, too. The trade is knowing where it is, and my father's whole crime was that he wouldn't say where this one's was out loud to a buyer, because he loved him. That's a real crime, and I'm not asking anybody to pretend it isn't. I'm offering to pay for it at $250 a pair. She turned back to Rowan. I'd like him back, she said. Rowan raised his eyebrows about 1/16 of an inch. Not as part of the 8, she said. Not credited. He is yours. You paid for him. You can keep him standing in that pen till he's 20 if you want. But he's no use to you, and he's eating your hay. And if you'll let me take him home, I'll finish him properly and bring him back in the last pair. And you can have him at $250 with his own brother beside him, same as everybody else. He costs you nothing and he owes you nothing. And if I fail, you've lost a horse you were never going to use. His brother's on the ore road at Bonanza, Rowan said. I sold him in June, to Kittredge, for the no. 3 wagons. I know where he is, said Tamsen. I'll buy him back with my own money, and it'll not touch your note. You've no money. I'll have money, she said, if you'll write 1 line into it for me. That was the sentence that did it, and Alma Rowan, who had been standing on that step with a ledger against her hip for half an hour, came down off it and went inside without being asked, and had the book open on the table before her brother got to the door. The office of the Cross Anvil was 1 room with a plank floor, a stove, a map of the Saguache Land Office survey on the wall, and a table with a green blotter. Alma Rowan sat at the table. Silas Rowan stood. Tamsen Locke stood, and did not take the chair that was offered her, because standing was how she had got this far, and she was not going to change anything now. Say the line, Rowan said. Half, said Tamsen. Half of what? Of anything over $250. You'll not keep these pairs, mister. Rowan, you'll sell them, you sell everything. You'll put them in front of the Villa Grove barns, and the liveries in Salida, and the hotel trade. And a matched pair that will stand for a lady to get in behind is not a $250 horse, and you know it, and I know it, and that is why you are still standing here. So write it down. Anything you take above $250 for one of my pairs, we split it. Your half is yours. My half goes to my account. Against the note. No, said Tamsen. And that is the whole line. Not against the note. The note is $2,000, and the note is paid by the 8 pairs, and I want it written that the pairs pay the note entire, so there's no argument in 2 years about which dollar went where. My half of anything over $250 is mine. Cash or credit at your hay barn. Your choice, but mine. Rowan looked at his sister. Alma Rowan did not look up. That's a partner's clause, he said. That's a clause, said Tamsen. It's what a man asks for when he's bringing something to the business that the business hasn't got. I am bringing something to the business that the business hasn't got, she said. You buy 60 harness horses a year, and you sell 60 harness horses a year, and you have never once in your life sold a made pair. Because a made pair takes 5 months, and nobody in this valley has 5 months. I have 22 months, and nothing else to do with them. The stove ticked. Out in the yard the 14 men had begun, in 2s and 3s, to find they had somewhere to be, and the sound of a horse being led away came through the wall. Write it, Rowan said. Alma Rowan wrote it. It took her 20 minutes, and it filled 1.5 pages of the ledger, and a separate sheet besides, and she read every line of it out loud twice, once for her brother and once for Tamsen Locke, and where a word was loose she stopped and made them settle it. The dates went down, as Tamsen had them in her head. 1 pair by the 1st of June, 1889. 3 pairs by the 1st of October, 1889. 2 pairs by the 1st of June, 1890. 2 pairs by the 1st of August, 1890. A pair refused for soundness or for temper counted as no pair and no credit, and could be replaced within 60 days. And the last clause, in Alma Rowan's upright hand, of any sum realized above $250 upon the resale of a pair delivered under this agreement, 1/2 to the account of T. Locke, T. Locke, said Tamsen, when she read it. That's right. Leave it that way. She signed it T. Locke. Silas Rowan signed it under her. Alma Rowan witnessed it and blotted it and made a fair copy. And Tamsen Locke folded the copy into quarters and put it in the pocket of the canvas coat and took out of that same pocket the letter her father had written 3 times and stood a moment with it in her hand. She put it back in her pocket unread. She was at the door when Silas Rowan said, "Miss Locke, why not read it?" "Because you'd have taken it," she said. "And then we'd both have had nothing." She got up on the wagon, turned the sorrels, and drove out of the yard with a black gelding tied on behind. And 14 men watched her go, and by supper that night there were 3 different versions of it in Sagwache, and none of them had the clause in it, because the clause was the only part nobody had understood. Harlan Locke was at the gate when she came up Kerber Creek in the last of the light, and he had been at the gate a long time. He saw the black horse behind the wagon before he saw his daughter's face, and he took hold of the top rail with both hands. "Tamsen," he said. "Oh, Tamsen, what did he say?" "He signed," she said. "Signed what?" She told him, on the wagon seat, with the sorrels standing and the cold coming down off the Coca-Topa. She told him the 8 pairs and the $250 and the dates and the clause, and she watched her father go, in the space of about a minute and a half, from an old man to a young one and most of the way back again. $250, he said. "Tamsen, they're worth 3. They're worth 3 when they're made. They're not made." "You gave away, girl, you gave away $400, $500. You gave away, I gave away the apology," she said. "He wasn't going to take it out loud, so I paid it into the price. And Papa, listen to me now, because I'll say this once and then we're going to work. You are not to go to the Cross Anvil. You are not to write to him. You are not to speak about this to Aunt Pharaoh or to Yancey at the store or to anybody at the church, and if a man asks you in town how your daughter's horses are coming on, you say, 'Fine, thank you,' and you close your mouth on it." Harlan Locke stood at the gate with his hat in his hands. He said, "I only ever told the one lie in my life." "I know it," she said, and her voice came down about half a tone, and that was as close as either of them got to it that night. "I know exactly what you told and why. Now help me get this black horse in. He's been standing in a pen since April of last year, and he's forgot how to be looked after." Aunt Pharaoh came up Kerber Creek on the 11th of October in a buggy, which told her everything before he was out of it, because nobody drives a buggy 9 miles up a creek road for a neighborly reason. He was 36, and he was not a bad man either, which the valley found confusing when it came out later, and he had 640 acres at Cottonwood, and a house with a parlor in it, and a mother in the parlor. He sat with Harlan in the kitchen for 40 minutes, and he talked about hay, and about the Ore Road, and about a man in Del Norte who had a mowing machine for sale, and then Harlan Locke, who could not read a room the way he could read a horse, said he had better see to the pump and went out. "Tamsen," said Aunt Pharaoh, "you don't have to do this." "I know I don't," she said. "I want to. You've bound yourself to that man for 22 months. I've bound him to me for 22 months. Read it the other way round sometime." He got up. He stood by the stove with his hat, and he said it kindly, which was the worst of it. He said the note could go away. He said his mother had money of her own, and had always had a regard for Harlan. He said a place like Kerber Creek run alongside Cottonwood would carry itself. He said, and here he got careful, that a woman of 25 in a patched dress, standing in a yard full of men making bargains, was going to be talked about in a way that could not be taken back, and that he could stop all of that on Sunday if she would let him. Tamsen Locke listened to the whole of it without moving. Then she said, "Mr. Pharaoh, if you pay that $2,000, what am I?" He said, "You'd be my wife. I'd be a woman a man paid $2,000 for," she said. "And every day of my life somebody in this valley would know the figure. You are offering to lift me out of a hole. I would rather come up the side of it, and I will, and it'll take me 22 months, and at the end of it there will be a line in a book that says I did." She let him get to the door before she said the rest of it, because she had decided years ago that she would never let a man leave a room thinking she had been unkind, when what she had actually been was clear. "And Mr. Farrow, my father sent me to say sorry. Everybody in that yard on Wednesday knew what I'd come to say before I got down off the wagon, and you started saying it for me before I'd got my feet on the ground. I've had 25 years of men answering questions I was asked. I'd take a great deal from a man who'd ask me one and then wait." Winter came down the valley in the third week of November and stayed until April, the way it does at 7,700 feet, and Tamsen Locke worked through the whole of it in a way that nobody saw, which is the ordinary condition of that kind of work. Here is what she knew that the valley did not, and it is worth saying plainly, because everything that comes after runs on it. A pair is not two horses. A pair is one animal with 8 legs and 2 opinions, and the trade is in the opinions. Anybody can put 2 horses of a color side by side and sell them at a distance. That is a match, and a match is worth $30 more than a single, and no more than that. A pair is something else. A pair steps at the same instant, leans into the collar at the same instant, and this is the whole art of it. A pair has settled between themselves, before ever a buyer sees them, which of the two is going to think first. There is always one who thinks and one who answers. If both of them think, they argue in the collar, and you will feel it in the lines all day. If neither of them thinks, they will walk into a hole in the road together at the same speed. So Tamsen Locke did not shop for color. She shopped for temper, and she got the animals nobody wanted, at prices nobody argued with, and the way she got them was by hiring herself out. Through that winter, she shod horses at 75 cents a head at 6 places along the creek. She drove hay for the Ortegas at Villa Grove for 11 days in January, in weather that took the skin off her face. She broke 4 single horses to harness for Yonsei at the store at $8 the head, and took part of it in flour. And everywhere she went, she looked at what was standing in the back of the corral with its winter coat up and its price down, and she bought a rangy brown mare with a ewe-neck that nobody could stand to look at, who turned out to be the finest thinker in the valley for $22. A little bald-faced bay that had been quit on twice for kicking, for nothing at all, off a man at Bonanza who was glad to see him go down the road. A pair of half-brother grays out of the Ortega place, 4 and 5, that had never had a hand laid on them in anger, and had also never had a hand laid on them at all. By the 1st of April, she had 19 head on Kerber Creek, and she had $8. And every horse she owned was one of somebody else's mistakes. The first pair she made was the pair she was most afraid of, which is the correct order, and almost nobody does it. The Ortega Grays, Tino and Cruz, were half-brothers, 4 and 5 years old, unhandled, and so nearly identical that Harlan Locke could not tell them apart at 40 yards until June. That was the danger. 2 horses that look the same will be sold as a pair by anybody, and 2 horses that look the same are usually not a pair at all, because looking alike is a fact about their sires, and being a pair is a fact about their heads. She spent 6 weeks finding out which of them thought. It turned out to be Cruz, the smaller and worse-looking one, and once she knew it, she never again asked Tino a question. Every gate, every turn, every new thing in the road, she put through Cruz and let Tino take his answer off his brother. And by the middle of May, the 2 of them were stepping in a way that made Harlan Locke stand at the fence in the evening with his hands in his pockets, not saying anything, which from him was a sermon. On the 1st of June, 1889, she brought them down Kerber Creek to the Cross Anvil, driving them to the flat wagon with 800 pounds of nothing but sand in the bed, because she had learned that a buyer will always want to see the thing you have not shown him, and she would rather choose which thing that was. Silas Rowan came out of the office and looked at them for a long time without touching them. Then he said, "Get up." She thought he meant her. He meant himself, and he went up on the seat on the off side and sat down and put his hands on his knees and said nothing else, and Tamsen Locke drove her first pair up the Poncha Road, with the man who held her father's note sitting 18 inches away from her for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He tested them the way a man tests horses when he actually knows, which is to say he barely spoke. He had her stop them on the grade and stand 3 minutes and start again on the pull. He had her back the loaded wagon 20 feet uphill, which is the meanest thing you can ask of a green pair, and the truest. Coming down, he asked her to hold them at a walk on the long shale bend a mile above where the road turns left, and she did, and neither of the grays so much as thought about the collar, and Silas Rowan looked out over the drop on his side for a while and did not say what he was thinking. Near the bottom, he said, "You put the little one on the near side. He's the one that thinks," she said. "I want him where I can see his ear. Most men would put the good-looking one where the buyer stands. Most men sell them in the yard," she said. "I make them for the road." They came into the Cross Anvil at 4 in the afternoon. Alma Rowan wrote in the ledger, "1 pair, grays, geldings, 5 and 4, delivered under agreement, $250, credited against note. Balance, $1,750. Rowan said, "At the door, Miss Locke, I'd like to ask you a question, and I'd like you to answer it, and not your father, and not anybody else, because there's nobody here but us. Ask it. Can you do that 7 more times?" And Tamsen Locke, who could have said yes and been believed, said 6 more times, "Certainly. The 7th I don't know yet, and I'll tell you the day I do." He sold the grays 19 days later to the Monte Cristo livery in Salida for $390. Alma Rowan wrote out the line without being asked, in her upright hand, and read it aloud across the table to her brother, because she had a way of making a man hear his own arrangements. Resale of gray pair, $390. Excess above $250, $140. 1/2 to the account of T. Locke, $70. $70 in the summer of 1889 was 3 months of a hired man's wages, and it was the first money Tamsen Locke had ever earned that came out of a decision instead of out of her back. She spent $61 of it on the 8th of July, in Bonanza, on a black gelding named Bishop. The Ore Road did not want to sell him. Kittredge, who ran the No. 3 wagons, had 40 head and knew what he had in the black, and he opened at $90 and came down to $75 and would not come further, and stood there in the middle of a mud street with his thumbs in his belt enjoying himself, because a woman in a patched dress who wants one particular horse is the easiest arithmetic in the world. Tamsen Locke let him enjoy it for a while. Then she said, "Mr. Kittredge, that horse has been on the same side of the pole for 13 months. Look at him. He's high on the near shoulder, and he's wearing his near hind toe off, and by spring you'll have a lame horse and a $30 horse. I'll give you $61, and I'll put a hand on your gray team's mouths before I go, because whoever's driving them is hauling on them, and one of those geldings has got a sore in his bar that you don't know about." He got the $61, and she got the horse, and she also spent 40 minutes on his gray team in a livery barn for nothing, which is why Kittredge told that story for the next 10 years, and always told it in her favor. She brought Bishop up Kerber Creek on the 10th of July, 1889, and turned him loose in the horse pasture, and Deacon was 300 yards off down by the willows, and came up the fence line at a dead run, and stopped so hard he sat down. The two of them stood nose to nose for a minute and a half with a wire between them, not making any sound at all, and then they went off side by side down the fence and grazed with their heads together like men agreeing about somebody, and Harlan Locke went into the house and shut the door and did not come out until supper. That was the summer the valley started to talk in a different key. 3 pairs went down to the Cross Anvil on the 1st of October, 1889, and the note came off $750 in one morning, and the balance in Alma Rowan's book read $1,000, and there is nothing in this world that changes a valley's opinion of a woman faster than a halved number in a ledger. Ot Farrow came up the creek once more in September and did not get out of the buggy. He said from the seat that his offer stood. She said she was obliged to him, and meant it, and that it still stood at the same place it had stood in October, which was not a place she was going. And the pairs began to travel. Rowan sold the brown pair, Tildy, the ewe-necked mare nobody could stand to look at, and a plain brown gelding called Moss to a doctor in Alamosa for $420. He sold the sorrels to the Villa Grove barn for $370. He kept the bald-faced bay pair a month and then let them go to a hotel in Salida for $445. And that one hurt him to sell, Alma said, which for Silas Rowan was a form of joy. By the end of that year, the account of T. Locke on the facing page of that ledger stood at $251.50, and Tamsen Locke owned, for the first time in her life, something that was not work. She bought a hay rake, 2 sets of harness, a milk cow for her father, and no dress at all. Alma Rowan noticed the no dress, because Alma Rowan noticed everything, and in September she had done a thing that neither of them ever spoke of afterward. She had taken a length of good dark green wool out of the chest in her own room and carried it out to the yard where Tamsen was tying down a load, and offered it, and said something about the sale at Salida and about how a body ought to have one thing that isn't working clothes. Tamsen Locke looked at that cloth for a while. Then she said, "Miss Rowan, I'll take it and I thank you, and I'll not make it up till the note's paid." "Why ever not?" "Because if I turn up in that yard in a green dress," she said, "they'll say he's been at me. And if I turn up in this one till the last day, then when the last day comes they'll have to say the other thing." The green wool sat folded in the bottom of a trunk on Kerber Creek for 10 months. The Salida trip was the 14th of September, and it is the day most people in the story would tell you they understood something, though none of them would agree about what. Rowan took 2 pairs down over the pass to show at the Monte Cristo, and he took Tamsen, because a made pair shows to a buyer 3 times better if the maker drives them, and he had worked that out for himself by then. They came into town in the middle of the morning. The hotel man came out onto the boardwalk in a waistcoat with a watch chain and looked at the pairs, and looked at the woman on the seat in the patched brown-gray dress with the mismatched shoulder, and reached up and put a 25-cent piece in her hand and told her to walk them and keep them off the corner, and then turned to Silas Rowan and said, "Now, sir, these are the Cross Anvil pairs I've heard about. There is a thing that happens in a man's face when he is about to be agreeable. Rowan had it. He got as far as, 'They are, and I bred thee,' and he stopped. He stopped in the middle of the word, standing on the boardwalk of the Monte Cristo Hotel, with the watch chain in front of him, and Tamsen Locke up on the wagon seat with a quarter in her fist, watched him stop. Then Silas Rowan said, "I didn't breed them, and I didn't make them, and I've had nothing to do with them beyond paying for them. That's Miss Locke of Kerber Creek, and every question you've got is hers. Ask her." The hotel man laughed, because he thought it was a joke, and then he stopped laughing, because nobody else was. She was 40 minutes answering him. She told him what the near horse thought about umbrellas, and what the off horse thought about the sound of a bandsaw, because a hotel pair stands in a street all day, and a street is nothing but umbrellas and saws. She told him which of the 2 he ought to speak to when they were stood at the door. She told him the price, which was Rowan's to tell, and Rowan let her tell it, and she told it $40 higher than Rowan had said in the wagon on the way over. And the hotel man paid it without a word, because by then he had understood that he was not buying horses, he was buying 5 months of somebody's attention. Walking back to the barn, Rowan said, $40. She said, he'd have gone $60. I left him $20 so he'd feel like a horseman. He'll buy again in the spring. Silas Rowan put his hands in his coat pockets and looked down the street at Salida, and said, in the tone of a man reading a figure off a page and finding it different from the one he expected, Miss Locke, I am 33 years old, and I have been buying horses since I was 15, and I have never once thought about what a buyer needs to feel. That's because nobody ever handed you a quarter, she said. They went back over Poncha the next day, and she gave him back the 25-cent piece at the top of the grade, and he would not take it, and she left it on the seat between them, and it sat in the office of the Cross Anvil, on the windowsill above the blotter, for the next 11 months, where anybody could see it. The midpoint of this story is not a lie discovered. It is a truth found in a harness loft by a woman who then chooses, deliberately and at cost, to carry it in a sack under her wagon seat and say nothing. It happened on the 2nd of October, 1889, the morning after the 3-pair delivery, and it happened because she asked for junk. She had asked Del Prine, back in the spring, whether anything was left of the wreck rig from Poncha, because she wanted the hames off it. Good steel hames were $6 a pair, and she had 19 head and no money, and hames do not care what they have been through. Del had said there was a heap of it up in the loft over the harness room, where nobody had gone since the summer of 1887. And on the 2nd of October she went up the ladder with a lamp to get them. The hames were there. So was the rest of it, the near-side harness off that wagon, stiff as a board, a breeching cut through where somebody had used a knife in a hurry, one line, a broken hame strap, and a collar. She got it down the ladder and out into the daylight in the yard, and she stood there holding it in both hands for a long time, and Alma Rowan, watching from the office window, said afterward that she thought the woman had taken ill. It was a Cross Anvil collar. It had the mark burned into the underside of the cap, and it had been made for a big-shouldered horse, a 1,600-pound freight horse of the kind Rowan had 20 of. And it was 2 full sizes too long in the drop for the black gelding standing 60 miles away in a pasture on Kerber Creek. A collar too long does not look wrong to anybody. It sits down on the neck and it looks generous. On the flat, with the horse pulling straight, it is merely loose, but on a downgrade with 4,200 pounds of freight pushing at the breeching and the whole rig alive under him. A collar that is long rides up and forward, and the rim of it comes onto the point of the shoulder, and it grinds there with every single stride, and there is nothing on this earth a horse can do about it, except try to climb out from under the thing that is hurting him. He had tried to get out from under something for the whole mile, Del Prine had said, and nobody had asked out from under what. Tamsen Locke turned the collar over in her hands in the yard of the Cross Anvil and found the wearer. It was there, unmistakable, a polished glazed patch on the inside of the rim on the near side, the leather burnished the way leather goes when it has been rubbing on one place under load. She had shaved the hair off Deacon's near shoulder in July to get at a lump she did not like the feel of, and she had found white hairs coming in over the point of it in a patch about the size of her palm, and she had thought then that he had been knocked in the pen. Her father had sold a horse that was not finished and had not said so, and that was true and would always be true. And Silas Rowan's own driver had put that horse into a collar out of Silas Rowan's own harness room that was 2 sizes wrong for him, and taken him down the north side of Poncha Pass with 4,200 pounds behind, and $1,140 of the $2,000 hanging around Harlan Locke's neck for 2 years had been ground into that black horse's shoulder by the Cross Anvil's own leather. She stood in that yard and did the arithmetic that anybody would do. $1,140 off the note. A lawyer in Alamosa would take it in a morning. There would be no more pairs, no more dates, no more $250, and the balance would go from $1,000 to a figure she could probably pay in a year, and the whole valley would say, at last, that the Locks had been done wrong. Then she did the other arithmetic, which almost nobody does. If she laid that collar on the table in the office, the note would shrink and she would become, that same afternoon and for the rest of her life, a woman who had got out of a debt, not a woman who had paid one. The 8 pairs would stop at 4, and the clause would stop with them, and the line in Alma Rowan's book would never be written. And the man inside that office, who had built a whole life on the single principle that the written thing is the true thing, would find out that the written thing had been wrong for 2 years, and that he had been the one who wrote it. She went and got a grain sack off the wagon. She put the collar in it, and tied the neck of it with twine, and laid it under the seat and put her coat over it. Then she went in and drank a cup of coffee at Alma Rowan's table, and talked about the weather coming, and about whether the 1st of June was too early for the next 2 pairs, and drove home up Kerber Creek in the afternoon light, with $1,140 lying under her feet the whole way. She had a collar made for Deacon that winter by a saddler in Del Norte. To a measure she took herself with a piece of baling wire, and it cost her $9 of the money in Alma Rowan's book, and it was the best $9 anybody in the San Luis Valley spent in the year 1890. Then she went and found out whether she was right. It took until the 3rd week of February, because you cannot hurry the thing you are trying to prove. She put him in the new collar and worked him single on the flat for 3 weeks, and he was the same honest horse he had always been. She put weight behind him. She put more weight behind him. On the 26th of February, she took him and his brother, in double harness for the first time in 34 months, down the Kerber Creek road with 2,000 pounds of hay on the wagon, and her heart going like a bird in her chest. And she took them down the steep pitch below the cottonwoods where the road drops and the load comes onto the breeching and pushes. Deacon walked down that pitch on a loose line, with his ears going back and forward, and his brother swinging beside him. And at the bottom he blew his nose and shook his whole hide, the way a horse does when a thing is finished, and Tamsen Locke sat on the wagon seat at the bottom of that hill, and cried for the first time since the 3rd of October, 1888, and then got down and checked his shoulder with her fingers, and found nothing there at all. There was never anything wrong with that horse but a piece of leather. Her father found the sack in the shed on the 4th of March. He had gone in for a whetstone, and he had found a grain sack tied with twine on the top of the wall plate, where nothing lives, and Harlan Locke was 59 years old, and a horseman for 45 of them, and he did not need to open it very far. He carried it into the kitchen, and set it on the table, and sat down in front of it. "How long?" he said. "Since October." "Which October?" "Since the one before last," said Tamsen. Harlan Locke put his hands flat on the table on either side of that sack, and he said, "You've known for 17 months that the man was wrong, and you've been driving horses down there and taking $250 for them, and letting this valley say what it says about me." "Yes, girl, that's $1,040. That's Tamsen. That's the wagon and the freight, and Dell's wages, that's not my doing. That's their collar and their driver and it's their collar," she said. "It's not their fault." "Papa, listen to me. You sold a horse as broke to double that was not finished. If you'd said one sentence to Silas Rowan in March of 1887, one sentence, 'This one is green on a grade and wants watching,' Del Prine would have put our collar on him and looked at the fit, because Del is a good hand, and that is what a good hand does when he's been told to watch. You didn't say it. So they didn't watch. And the collar did the rest, and nobody would say a word against me if you took that into Saguache." "They'd say plenty," said Tamsen. "They'd say the Locks got out of $1,140. And then in 30 years, when you're gone and I'm old, that is the only thing anybody will remember about this family. Harlan Locke sat at his own table with his hands on either side of a grain sack and wept, which his daughter had seen twice before in her life, and she stood behind his chair with her hand on his shoulder and let him. Then he said, "And what do I get?" She said, "You get the 1st of August. You get to stand in that yard when the last pair goes in and the book says nothing is owed. That's the only clean thing there is, Papa, and I'm 21 months into buying it for you." He said he understood. He believed he understood. And on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of a February thaw, in the back of Yancey's store in Saguache, with a cup of something in his hand and 3 men listening who had been kind to him, Harlan Locke could not carry it 1 more mile, and he told Aunt Pharaoh about the collar. The 1st of June, 1890, was the worst day of the 22 months, and it was nobody's fault at all. She brought 2 pairs down, a heavy brown pair that were as good as anything she had ever made, and a pair of Duns, 6 and 6, that had done everything right for 5 months. It was hot, and there was a wind out of the southwest that comes up the valley in June and gets into everything, and the Cross Anvil yard had 20 men in it, because word had gone round that the Locke woman was 2 pairs from clearing $2,000, and men will ride 12 miles to see a number go to nothing. The Browns went through like water. The Duns came up the yard, and a hay tarp on a stack by the shop got under the wind and cracked like a rifle 10 feet off the off-horse's head, and he went sideways into his mate, and the pair of them came around in a half circle with the pole between them, and the near horse got a leg over a trace, and there was 40 seconds of the kind of noise that empties a corral fence. Nobody was hurt. Tamsen had them stopped and standing in under a minute, which 20 men saw, and the near Dun stood there shaking with a skinned hawk, and his eyes showing and his whole education gone out of him like water out of a boot. The yard was quiet. Silas Rowan came down off the step and walked around the pair once and looked at the skinned hawk. And then he said, in a voice that carried to the fence and had nothing in it, "Alma, that pair's refused." Somebody said, "Silas, refused for temper," Rowan said. "No pair and no credit. 60 days to replace under the agreement." It was, said everybody afterward, a hard thing. Aunt Pharaoh was at the fence, and Aunt Pharaoh came off it fast and said, "Rowan, for God's sake, the wind did that. There isn't a horse in this valley that, Silas, the woman has 8 weeks of." And Tamsen Locke said, "Mr. Pharaoh." She said it in exactly the voice she had used in that yard 20 months before, and it stopped him in exactly the same place, and this time 20 men understood what they were watching. Then she turned to Alma Rowan on the step and said, "Write it refused. Refused for temper. 1st of June, no credit. Put it in the book. Miss Locke, put it in the book, Miss Rowan. If a pair of mine goes off in a yard in a puff of wind, then a pair of mine is not a pair. And if he lets me off that today, then the other 7 are a favor, and I did not spend 20 months making a favor." She loaded the Dun pair and drove them home, and it was 9 miles, and she did not stop. She was 3 weeks getting that near horse back, and she did not get him back. She got him honest, and she got him quiet, and she never again got him certain, and a pair that is not certain will empty a hotel doorway, and Tamsen Locke knew it by the 24th of June, with 37 days left of the 60. So she did the thing she had been saving. There was a brown 5-year-old on the Ortega place that she had wanted since 1888 and could not afford, out of the same mare as Tino and Cruz. She went down to Villa Grove on the 26th of June with $124 in cash out of her account in Alma Rowan's book, which was every dollar she had. And she bought him, and she brought him home and put him in with Tildy's full sister. And she had 25 days to make a pair. She made it in 21. She delivered on the 21st of July, 1890, and Silas Rowan drove them 11 miles himself before he would say a word, and then he said 1, accepted. 6 pairs, $1,500 against the note, $500 to go. The 1st of August 1890 came in hot and clear, with the Sangre de Cristo standing up sharp on the east side of the valley, the way they do before weather. And Tamsen Locke came down Kerber Creek at 8 in the morning with the last 2 pairs, driving one and leading the other, and her father on the seat beside her, in a coat he had not had on since 1887. She was wearing the brown-gray work dress with the square patch on the shoulder, and the hem faced with the strip of darker cloth. She had thought about the green wool at 5 that morning, and had left it in the trunk, because she had said she would, and there were 30 people in the yard of the Cross Anvil by 9 o'clock to see whether she would. The 7th pair was a pair of dark bays, and it went in without a story. The 8th pair was deacon and bishop. They came up that lane in double harness, black as stove lids, 9 and 10 years old, 200 pounds heavier apiece than when they had left the country, stepping at the same instant. The yard did not make a sound. Del Prine, who had not been able to lift a full bucket with his left arm since the spring of 1887, took his hat off, and he was not a man for gestures, and did not know he had done it. Silas Rowan went up on the seat, and Tamsen Locke drove that pair 4 miles up the Poncha Road, with 3,000 pounds of sand behind them, and she brought them down the long shale bend a mile above where the road turns left, at a walk on a loose line, and Silas Rowan sat and looked out over the drop on his side, and did not say anything at all, and neither did she, because there was nothing to say that either of them did not already know. In the office at 11:30, Alma Rowan wrote, 1 pair, black geldings, brothers 10 and 9, delivered under agreement, $250, credited against note. And then, on the line beneath it, she wrote a word she had been waiting 22 months to write, and she underlined it, and she turned the book around on the blotter so that it faced the woman standing on the other side of the table. Balance, nil. Note discharged in full, 1st August 1890. She took the note itself out of the tin box, and Silas Rowan wrote paid across the face of it, and the date and his name, and handed it to Tamsen Locke, and she folded it into quarters, and put it in the pocket of her coat, where an apology had been 22 months before. Harlan Locke stood by the door with his hat in both hands, and did not say one word. And that was the finest thing he ever did. And 40 minutes later, Ott Farrow's buggy came up the lane with a grain sack on the seat beside him. He came into that yard like a man arriving exactly on time. He got down with the sack in his fist, and he walked into the middle of the open ground, where a woman had stood in a patched dress 22 months earlier, and he said, loud, so it carried, Silas Rowan. Before this crowd goes home, there's a thing here that has to be said, and it should have been said in 1887, and I'll say it since nobody else will. Tamsen Locke went white to the mouth, not for herself. She had looked at her father, and her father was looking at the ground. Ott Farrow untied the twine and set the collar on the tailgate of her wagon. He said it well, in fairness to him. He said the black gelding that wrecked at Poncha had been worked in a collar 2 sizes too long out of the Cross Anvil's own harness room. He said the mark was burned in the cap where anybody could read it. He said the wear was there on the rim for any horseman to see and to turn it over and look. He said $1,140 of a $2,000 note had been laid on a broken old man for 3 years for a thing that was not his doing, and that Harlan Locke was owed an apology in front of this valley, and that he for one had not been able to sleep since he learned of it. He did not say the other part, which was that he had waited 5 months and had chosen this morning, and that the morning he had chosen was the morning the note was paid. The yard made a sound like a held breath let out. Del Prine walked over to that tailgate. He picked the collar up in his good hand and turned it over and looked at the inside of the rim and stood there in the sun for maybe 15 seconds. Then he said, out loud, to 30 people, "That's mine. That's the one off the peg by the door." His own was on his wagon, and I never took it off. Ours was hanging right there, and I put ours on him, because it was 6 in the morning, and it was there. I never once looked at the fit. I've took a wage for 3 years off a man I helped make wrong. And Silas Rowan took the collar out of Delprine's hand. He turned it over. He found the glaze on the rim with his thumb, the way you find a knot in a board, and he stood with it in both hands in the middle of his own yard, and he did not look at Ott Farrow, and he did not look at Harlan Locke. He looked at Tamsen Locke, standing 20 feet off, with her hands loose at her sides. He said, "How long have you had this?" "Since the 2nd of October, 1889, she said. "You found it in my loft." "I did." He said, "You have carried that for 10 months. You have driven 5 pairs into this yard since then. You took a pair refused in front of 20 men on the 1st of June and made me write it in the book, and you sold your last dollar to buy a horse to replace it, and that has been sitting in your shed the whole time." "Yes," said Tamsen Locke. And the whole yard was waiting for the man to explain her, or thank her, or shout, or tear something up, because that is what a yard expects. What Silas Rowan did was put the collar down on the tailgate, and take his hat off, and ask her a question, and then stand there and wait for her to answer it, which was a thing that had not been done to her in 26 years of life. He said, "Why?" She took her time. Everybody there remembered afterward how long she took. Then she said, "Because you'd have torn the note up. You'd have done it that same afternoon, in front of Alma and Dell and whoever was standing there, and you'd have meant it kindly, and it would have been just." And on the 2nd of October, 1889, I had 4 pairs left to make and 10 months to make them in, and if you had torn that note up, I would have gone home that day as a woman who was let off a debt because a man found out he'd been in the wrong. That is what the Valley would have said at my funeral. She was let off. She said, "I did not want to be let off. I wanted the book. I wanted 8 lines in Miss Rowan's hand, and a number that went down to nothing, because I put it there, $250 at a time, and I have got it. It's in my pocket, and it is worth more to me than $1,140, and it will be worth more to me every year I live." She said, "And I'll tell you the other reason, and then I'm done. You are a man who believes a thing is true when it's written down. It's the only religion you've got, and it came out of somebody cheating you when you were 24. If I'd laid that collar on your table 10 months ago, you'd have found out that the truest page in your own book had been wrong for 2 years, and that you were the one who wrote it. And I'd have been the one to hand you that, and then I'd have been standing in your yard every month afterward with $250 worth of horses, and you'd never once have looked at me straight again." She said, "Last, you didn't need it, and I didn't want it. So I carried it. It's a heavy thing, that collar, and it's the lightest thing I've carried in 3 years." Silas Rowan stood in his yard with his hat in his hand. Then he turned to his sister, and he said, "Alma, read the account." And Alma Rowan, who had been standing on that plank step with a ledger against her hip for 22 months and had missed nothing, opened the book at the facing page and read it out to the whole Valley in a clear, flat voice. 8 pairs delivered under agreement at $250, $2,000, note discharged this day. Resales realized and under written order, $390, $445, $480, $495, $500, and the black pair spoken for at Denver at $540. Total, $3,640. Excess above the agreement, $640. 1/2 to the account of T. Locke, $820. There was a noise in that yard then, and the noise was 30 people doing arithmetic at the same time. Silas Rowan said, in front of all of them, Miss Locke, you have made me $640 in 22 months on horses I would have bought as singles for $130 apiece and sold in a week, and I have paid you $820 for it, and the $820 is cheap, and everybody standing here knows it. He said, I'm not going to tear anything up, and I'm not going to give you anything, because you'd not have it, and you'd be right not to. He said, I want to say a thing out loud before it's written, which is not how I do business, and has not been how I do business since I was 24 years old. And Silas Rowan said, to a woman in a patched brown-gray work dress standing 20 feet away from him in the middle of his own yard, the pairs go out under both names, Locke and Rowan. You make them, you price them, you refuse them, I find them and I sell them, and I carry the hay. Half and half, written any way you'll sign it, and the making is yours, and nobody in this valley speaks for it but you. Then he stopped talking. He did not fill it. He stood there with his hat in his hand and let the silence sit in his own yard in front of 30 people, and waited. It was, Alma Rowan said afterward, the only truly intelligent thing her brother ever did. Tamsen Locke let it sit as long as she wanted to. Then she said, Locke and Rowan, in that order, because it's the alphabet, and you'll not argue with the alphabet. I'll not, he said. Then yes, she said. They signed it on the 9th of September, 1890, and the sign that went up over the corral at the Cross Anvil that October was painted by a man in Salida and read Locke and Rowan matched pairs, and her name was first on it for 31 years. She wore the green wool for the first time to the signing. She had made it up in 4 evenings after the 1st of August, and the brown-gray dress with the patch at the shoulder went on a peg inside the barn door on Kerber Creek and came off that peg every working morning for the rest of her life, because she had never once been ashamed of it and was not about to start. The 25-cent piece stayed on the windowsill above the blotter. Deacon and Bishop went to Denver in the last week of September 1890 to a livery on Larimer Street and were photographed in front of it in 1893, standing in a doorway full of umbrellas without moving a foot, and the photograph hung in the office of the Cross Anvil until the building came down. And on the 9th of September, with the ink not dry and Alma Rowan gone inside on an errand that took her an unlikely length of time, Silas Rowan asked Tamsen Locke a second question in his own yard, out loud, before it was written down anywhere. And then he did the only thing he had learned to do in 2 years that was worth anything at all. He waited.